This book is called Beat Depression by David Hinds from 2001. This is part 2 called Why Me? And the chapter is chapter 7, Inherited Genes. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1803 to 82. The bottom line: we have no choice but to make the best of who we are. There is a genetic predisposition to some forms of depression, particularly those that recur. For instance, it has been established that if one identical twin suffers from depression, there is a 70% chance that the other twin will also. Non-identical twins, in common with other relatives, parents, or children of a person who suffers from depression, run a 25% risk of depressive illness due to the genetic factor. The genetic factor appears to be an important one. Researchers on both sides of the Atlantic identified two groups of adopted individuals: those who had been diagnosed as having a depressive illness and those who did not suffer from depression. They found that the biological relatives of adopted persons with depressive illnesses had higher rates of clinical major depressive illnesses than did relatives of those who were not depressed. How is it that our brains could be affected by the genetic factor to render some of us more vulnerable to depression than others? People who have a greater biological sensitivity to depression than others are more likely to switch into depressed states of mind because something goes wrong with the way that neurochemicals are produced and used in the brain. This malfunction is believed to be due to our genes, the segments of DNA that control a vast number of chemical processes. Genes are essential for life. They control the color and texture of our skin, the face, the figure, the color of our eyes and hair, and they bring about changes and developments within ourselves so that as we grow, our sexual organs develop. Genes also play a part in personality and susceptibility to certain types of illnesses, including depression. But our individuality and the type of person we become mostly depends on ourselves and how we interpret the experiences we have had during infancy and early childhood. The way the brain develops during infancy and early childhood depends very much on social inputs. The brain of a child who is loved and wanted might mature differently from that of a child who is abused and constantly threatened. Our actual real-life experiences condition the brain, and this aspect of development marries what we perceive as happening to us in the outside world with what is going on inside our heads. This may sound fine in theory, but how does it work in practice? At the fundamental cell level, a human brain might be compared to a computer. After all, computers are essentially a series of tiny switches that can be programmed for either on or off, depending on the task to be performed. Likewise, our brain cells, neurons to be more precise, either fire, discharging an electrochemical signal for some kind of action to take place, run, daddy is mad at you, or do not fire if no change is required. Don't run, mummy wants to give you a sweetie. When, as an infant, you were distressed, as in the first bracketed example above, Your brain chemistry changed to prepare you for the ordeal at hand, arousing tension in the body. Hormones such as adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, and a number of different chemicals impact together to affect the way transmission takes place in the brain. Over time and with repetition, those significant chemical changes which occur in response to what is happening to us in the outside world can have the effect of modifying our brain receptors and the kind of attachment that one nerve cell makes with another. There is a connection between the shaping of our infant brain and the outside world right from our very early experiences of life. The long-term vision in medicine is to prevent symptoms in people with a genetic predisposition to depression by using a new generation of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, that will take over from Prozac and its successors. But what can we do to beat depression now? Let's start with what we should avoid doing. We should not blame our parents for the less than perfect set of genes we inherited, or for the less than perfect upbringing we experienced as a child, even if our experiences were downright miserable. We can't change the past and our genes, some of which will be rather good and better than other people's, cannot be part exchanged or re-engineered. Blaming others for our predicament is one of the surest ways to stay in depression. In blaming one or other of our parents or anyone else involved in our upbringing, including ourselves, we negate our power as individuals and render ourselves vulnerable. The future is decided by our current thinking. In order to break free from depression, it is imperative to believe that our parents or guardians were trying to do the best they could with the limited understanding, awareness, and knowledge they had at the time. If there is something that you need to forgive them for, but you don't quite know how to go about it, you may find the next 2 chapters helpful, together with chapter 39. The finest contribution to future happiness that can be made by the damaged child, cheated of his or own childhood and now in adulthood, is to ensure that the mistakes of previous generations are not allowed to manifest themselves in future generations.